Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with the one and only Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Michael. So much fun to be back. I always miss it whenever
Yeah,
when I miss a week or two.
yeah,
I always miss it, but I'm glad to be back with you guys today. So
that
thanks.
is that is awesome. So I've been waiting for this conversation because just right, you're in multifamily, you're doing the big stuff. I'm a residential guy. Still, we're both landlords, and if we rewind the clock, and if people were to check out your playlist, one of the things that we've talked about many times is uh, Class C doesn't do very well, historically speaking, in a recession, right? There is a talk track that, hey, in a recession, people would trade down and do all that stuff. We've talked ad nauseum about that not being really historically accurate, right? You're not going to go from Class A to Class C and all of those things. However, I just want to run this idea by you. I think this recession might be very different than the last several, and certainly every recession I experienced as an adult. And this is what I mean. So when I look at the job market, this is all about the job market, right? Historically speaking, there's white collar and blue collar. I think that's reasonable to say. I also see participation rate lower than it should be. I see job growth, right? We just talked about 2.6 million jobs added in the first half. You talked about you can't find hotel workers in the last video. So I have what might be a shocking thought. Want to get your reaction and let me know where I might be off or
All
if
right,
it's interesting. So
spring
here,
it on, spring it on me.
I think we're going to have a white collar recession and blue collar is going to do just fine, if not better. In fact, I think blue collar's wage inflation is far better than reported. And I think white collar is going to suffer a lot of jobs. So to convert that to your world, I think Class A tenants are going to see more pink slips, a lot more pink slips than blue collar. Blue collar, traditionally speaking, Class B, Class C. So I think this recession might be different. But what do you think?
Okay, well, so tell me why. That's what I want to know. Why do you think it's going to be different?
Well, I just look at all the job openings, and the job openings that I see would generally be called, at least a disproportionate amount, are blue collar jobs, right? Retail, restaurants, construction, lots of blue, like jobs that don't need college degrees. Everybody, like you talked about in the first episode, hotel workers. I think there's a lot of jobs and trades. You go and look at the trades, electricians and appraisers and all these other trades. We seem to have lost a decade of people like airline pilots and steward. I mean, just it seems to me that there's a whole huge gap of blue collar work, and you're not going to see layoffs. And if you do there, they'll just go to the next retailer or the next area. Where white collar, I think we could see a lot of white collar layoffs because, again, hey, if you're going to work in Silicon Valley, but now you move to Austin, Texas or Nashville and you're remote, why couldn't that be Costa Rica? If we're really going to see this work from home, why doesn't it go offshore? If it's truly white collar, you just need a phone and a computer. There's a lot cheaper places. So again, I don't know if this is happening. I just have a weird feeling that this may be disproportionately a white collar recession, which historically speaking is a Class A tenant. And again, I could be wrong. I get my mind goes crazy sometimes.
All right, well, let's see. I got to think through this a little bit, but let's see. So historically, what you have is in recessions when job cuts need to be made, is the jobs that get cut are the ones that are easily rehired or easily replaced. They're more execution jobs and
Sure.
less jobs where people have institutional knowledge that needs to be preserved, right?
True.
Or skills that are very hard to develop, right? So you see the blue collar workers getting laid off faster because if you can work a register here, you can work a register there, and it doesn't really, just get retrained on a new system and it's not a big deal. Whereas like the managers who understand how to run the retail outlet, right, or the people above them who know how to work a supply chain or what have you, those people, if you lose those people, and I mean, in the last episode, we talked about like Hertz and what happened with Hertz, or not, I didn't mention the name, I was thinking about Hertz, but car rental companies, right, where they lost 90% of their business and they fired everybody and had to restructure. Like once you lose those people, it's very hard to get back in business again, right? So so basically what companies look to do is they look to preserve their ability to ramp back up when the economy comes back. And that requires them to preserve that institutional knowledge and know-how. But the people who take it on the head are like the ones who don't have that knowledge. I don't really see that changing on a large scale. I could see for sure things happening company by company. Like there's some issues in tech again right now, and I think that relates to frankly this cheap debt issue, right? Where these companies are like a lot of these unicorns, that don't make any money, that exist on cheap debt and frankly even cheap equity, because there's so many VCs out there that are loaded up with cash that you got to put it somewhere. Suddenly that environment looks very different, and they are starting to get scared and starting to try to scale back to like get profitable, right? And so you may see some of those tech workers taking it on the chin. So, but I think if you're talking about bigger corporations, tech companies also tend to be fairly lean though in the first place, right? They're not like, they don't require as many people to run as like big companies with a lot of infrastructure that sell physical products or what have you, right? So tech is a little bit of a different animal. Also very interesting in the context of like bankruptcies, like what do you restructure? Like what is there with a tech company?
No, they go to zero.
There might not be anything there to restructure, right? So because it's basically all in people's heads, and
no physical assets.
Yeah, so I could see white collar workers getting having a harder time in this kind of recession than historically, but I don't see it flipping, and for a couple of reasons why. One I've already outlined. Another is that if white collar workers do get whacked in large numbers, their spending is going to drop, and that's going to filter through to retail establishments, hospitality, restaurants, all that other stuff where the blue collar workers work. So I think that they'll get hit hard. And in terms of like offshoring of white collar jobs, I mean, this is something that I'm involved with as a business owner. I have people who work with me virtually. I'm actually in the process of hiring more. But what I've found is that that's a difficult process. There are some things that you can do remotely with like an overseas worker from wherever it is, the Philippines or India or Mexico, but you're probably not going to have like your real go-to people like hired that way, right? And I think the bigger you get and the more sophisticated your business gets, the more important it is to have people who are like here, to have like the education here, who have the experience here, that I think that remote thing is good for certain kinds of clerical tasks that require some creativity, but don't require like the highest end, creative thinking. Like you're not going to like hire like your CMO from a virtual agency, right? Or even necessarily from, frankly, I don't think you're going to make your CMO like someone who's even like a CMO in India, say, just because the culture is different, what resonates is different. I mean, maybe they're going to be your CMO for your India subsidiary, right? But you probably are not going to make them your CMO here, because it's just marketing is different, right? In different countries, right? So I don't see the offshoring of white collar workers as being a threat to like the top level ones, but maybe more to the people who are on the borderline of white and blue collar, right? Where sort of, assistants, right? Or, what have you. But even there, like I've had assistants from various places and still have sort of defaulted back to US based virtual assistants as opposed to overseas, just because there's that kind of like cultural thing again, where it just sort of feel like it sort of works better here. But that's always
I think it's going to be interesting. One of my earliest memories, I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. One of my earliest memories was my father, right? So my father was I guess a white collar worker. He was in I guess he ran stock rooms for tech companies at the time, widgets, right? Moving components around. And we had a lot of recessions pain in the early 80s. So I think I was under 10 at the time.
Mm.
He was laid off for like 6 or 9 months at the time. And he ended up having to break down and go work for, somebody doing stucco. And let's just say my father's not handy. So that only lasted one day. But this is where I kind of all go back to is I think this recession is going to be unkind to white collar. I think this is going to disproportionately hit white collar. Some of that's because I'm in the Valley, right? To your point, I may be very biased there. I think there's a lot of tech companies and they're all, many of them 10 miles from my home that overhired in the last 18 months. And now they're going, that was kind of a mistake. So I think, and these are high-end jobs. I think your point about that rippling through to blue collar is well done. Cause again, 70% of the spending comes from like 30% of the bigger earners. That's just where the folks that have discretion. So I think this is a very complex problem, but it would not shock me in hindsight when we look at this recession. I don't think it flips, to your point, but if I had to get on a percentage basis, this is going to hit white collar 2 or 3 times harder, in my opinion, than past recessions. It's not like blue collar will escape it, but just given their participation rate, it'll be a lot easier to find a blue collar job than a white collar job. Because when the white collar gets laid off, it's like, how many junior accountants, how many marketing people do you need? Not as many, right? When you also start to, because one thing I did as a leader is I had to whack entire groups. And what did we do? We went after groups that didn't produce revenue. So if you were in a new revenue line that was the future of the company, you got whacked because, we couldn't bleed cash flow. We had to be cash flow positive or cash flow neutral. And we didn't need the future today because we had to pay the bills today. So we would whack marketing and sales and engineering, just because that's what we had to do. So I think this recession's going to be pretty painful on white collar, probably more than they expect.
I mean, that may be the case, but I think it still is the case that it's always tougher on blue collar.
That's fair.
Than on white collar. So even if it's bad, even if it's worse for white collar, than the last recession, say, which wasn't really that bad.
Wasn't bad on white collar.
For
it was
white
all
collar,
blue collar,
yeah. That maybe it'll be worse than that, but I think it'll still have the traditional, like, yeah, maybe it's bad for white collar, but it'll be even worse. And if you then translate that into real estate, I mean, look, as I've said before, many times, the white collar workers who get laid off, they've got cushion to fall back on, right? They've got savings. They've got, when you talk about like the 401ks and stuff that the government lets people borrow from or whatever, like they're the ones who have those, right? It's not the blue collar guys who have anything really saved up to fall back on. So the white collar workers, if it's really extended and they have a very long period of unemployment, then maybe then they're going to look for a new cheaper apartment or whatever. But people forget you got a year-long lease. You get laid off in month 3 of your lease or month 6 of your lease, right? And you try to break the lease. If it's a recession, you may be looking at like, well, your landlord's now going to like come after you for the entire balance of your lease, right? Good. So you don't save any money by paying that lease. Plus now you got a cheaper lease. So you're going to wait those 6 months and just pay it out of savings and then move. But chances are, typically for white collar workers, they're finding new jobs in 6 months or less, right? So they're not. So I think that you're just not going to see like a massive shifting of people from class A or class B into lower levels of apartments. I just don't see that happening because of the cushion that they've got, right? So
I like it. Jonathan, this is always a lot of fun. Where can people find you? Tell them about your Facebook group, because that is a very active place.
Yeah. So please, if you're interested in, to being part of my community, we've got about 12,000 people in the Facebook group at this point. It's called the Multifamily Investment Community. Please stop by, answer the questions that are asked. If you've heard about me here, drop that in. It's always great to know when people hear about me from this podcast. And that's the way to find it.
Thank you, buddy.